So let's go with the first of the seven areas that I've identified. The first one is the reason that IGN or PC Gamer or even major mainstream news and stuff doesn't cover MMORPGs, but they do cover things like FIFA and Call of Duty and Fortnite and League of Legends, is quite simply the MMORPG landscape is not as big as people think it is. The amount of people who actually play MMORPG games within the general gaming sphere is very low. And the amount of people who play them who then actively consume media on them, watching YouTube videos or watching Twitch streams, is even lower. It's a fraction of a fraction of a fraction. It's a niche within a niche within a niche. You go into a gaming shop, most people might not even know what the acronym MMORPG stands for. But when you hang around with these communities and when your friends are in guilds and Discord chats and everyone's playing the games, it can sometimes feel within the bubble of the MMO kind of sphere, everyone plays it. It can sometimes feel like it's the biggest, most popular genre in the world. Do you think that the audience sometimes forget how niche the MMO genre is in all of gaming?
Yeah, I think that's certainly true. In that regard, and that's because it's like a really big part of your life. Like MMORPGs, they're huge, right? And you invest so much time into them. It's not a game that you play for a week or a month. You could play it for years, right? You could be playing the same game. You can make lifelong friends in an MMORPG. This is obviously true in other games as well, but I think you'll see it crop up more commonly in MMOs. I do think that MMOs have an advantage in the content creation sphere, actually. And this is not, again, unique to MMOs, but again, you'll find it very commonly at MMOs, is the fact that you can create your own stories. You can create your own lore. I think games like this actually have a wider appeal than they otherwise would have in content creation. For example, I think a lot of people who don't even play RuneScape can really appreciate all of the kind of crazy Iron Man challenges that get done over there, right? And people are fascinated about the history of something like classic World of Warcraft, even if they don't necessarily play the game. So I think there are things that can be really interesting to people outside of that sphere. But yeah, in general, it can seem absolutely colossal. It could be a really, really big thing. But I think in general, gaming communities, you could, if you're part of this community, it can seem absolutely massive, when in reality, nobody knows who you are whatsoever.
Yeah, it's very small. I mean, Candy Crush makes more money than World of Warcraft.
Yeah.
People often say, the biggest online game in the world. I'm like, Farmville was bigger at its height. More people will buy and then never play FIFA than will play Guild Wars 1. Right now, it's ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. So yeah, I think the audience, people forget the audience size, and because the audience size isn't massive, it's not worth it for companies like IGN to bother reporting on the patch notes of the week. No one's going to give a front page. If it was print media, it'd be a front page of a magazine. But even now with digital media, front page space is still limited. No one's going to give a front page review of the latest that's happened in Black Desert Online, because it's just not going to be as popular as League of Legends or Fortnite or Minecraft. It's a niche within a niche. Let's go on to the second point, and this is an interesting one. Every hobby has toxicity within it. Every hobby will have the hardcore and the elitists. Magic the Gathering, Warhammer 40k, swimming, running, sports. You're always going to find this kind of like toxic tribalism. But a lot of hobbies enhance people's lives, as in you play tennis, you collect Warhammer, you collect Magic. The MMORPG is interesting because it's not necessarily about enhancing someone's life as much as creating a second life for them. It's actually positioned to create an entire fantasy world to become your reality. It's sometimes more real than real to other people. People who may have issues in real life will retreat into a fantasy world. And they will not only enjoy it as a hobby, but they'll enjoy it as a lifestyle. In many ways, it will become a lifeline to them. This isn't obviously all of the player base. This is a very extreme few, but the MMO encourages the creation of that new reality, and then it facilitates someone to exist within it. Because of this, people can make MMOs their personality. They can make them their character, their entire lifestyle. And this means that if you critique an MMO or say something bad about it, these hardcore and franchised few don't see it as a critique of the game. They see it as an attack on themselves personally, because the barriers between themselves and the game have begun to blur. They see this now as their reality. Because of this, a lot of general MMO critique is risky, because you know that you are going to attract the attention of some very unwell few who are extremely toxic. Have you had any personal experience? And again, if you're not comfortable, you don't need to approach this, but have you had any personal experience with the extreme negativity that MMO communities can harbor? And would you have any advice to a new content creator who is thinking about critiquing an MMO?
Yeah, this is an absolute classic one. This is a topic I actually really like to talk about on stream. I try and push back against it as much as I possibly can because I think it's ultimately incredibly self-destructive, actually, to MMO communities. Like when you look at, if you look at a game and you go, wait, these guys are like a cult, or you go like, wait, do I really want to play? Do I want to get into this? It's a little bit weird, right? And for sure, I definitely think this happens with MMOs a fair bit, right? And I think you hit the nail on the head, right? It's because it's such a big part of your identity, right? A big part of your life that, you're not really interpreting it. You're like, wait, have I wasted my time? Did I pick the wrong game? What am I doing, right? This is not, this isn't right. This can't be right. This is my game. I play this game. So it definitely does happen. And yes, yeah, I've been there. Like, I'm pretty well known, I guess, in the Guild Wars 2 content creation sphere as being very critical of a lot of decisions that have been made sometimes in the game. And yeah, you do definitely get a lot of pushback, right? Like if you are overly negative, right? Or if you are going to be very critical of the game, it's not going to be interpreted in good faith. And that's putting it politely. You are going to get some very angry people. In terms of advice, I'm not sure if there is really advice in this regard. I think it would actually be more of an appeal to the MMO community that, in fact, it's good for everyone who loves MMOs to actively call out these actors if people are being a little bit silly about criticism. Say, yeah, you know what? We should actually accept this criticism. We should actually discuss this and see if we can perhaps find some solutions and make it better. I think on the end of the content creator, I think you have to be ready for it. I think you have to expect it to an extent, right? But also realize that as with a lot of toxicity online, it's going to be a minority of individuals. It's not going to be like every single person's coming at you. It might feel that way, but it really isn't. Most MMO players, as unusual as we are, right? We are in general, I think, are pretty willing to actually discuss and critique some issues around the game that, even the main MMO that we play like every single day. So I think perspective is really important. And in general, I would say that we should do better. I think every MMO community suffers from this to an extent, and we should try and actively improve that aspect of the community.
Let's go on to the third point I decided to focus in on. And this is the risks of content creation specifically. The risks of being a general MMO channel versus being a specialist MMO channel. So the great thing about being a general channel is you can cover every game. I can put loads of keywords in the title. I can do an Elder Scrolls Online video, then a Guild Wars video, then a Final Fantasy video, then a RuneScape video, and I can talk about things in general. And this means I can appeal to every community at the cost of not being seen by any of the communities as an authority on their specific game. You have very general broad appeal, and I can see how systems work, but I maybe can't see the nuances or the details of those systems because I just don't have the time to invest in every single game. The flip side is, the positive of being a general channel is that I get to focus on whatever game I'm interested in at any given time, and it's less likely to burn out because I can just say, okay, there's nothing happening with this game, let's go and look at this game. The positives about being a specialist channel is you do get to understand how the game works. You do get to know all the classes, all the abilities, all the details, the developers, the content. You become an authority. The risk is you end up linking yourself as like a level of celebrity and your channel's growth and success to that game, because they become inextricably linked. They become kind of helixed together. And if the game you have built your channel up around dies or goes through a downflow, so does your channel. A lot of people built up channels around WildStar or around Terra, or we're seeing it with people jumping on the New World ship.
Oof.
And people expected hundreds of thousands of New World players, hundreds of thousands of views every day, and now we're seeing them get thousands of views, if, at best. What do you think the benefits are of being a general channel compared to the benefits of being a specialist channel? And what would you see the pitfalls of both of them being?
Yeah, the general channel it's in a lot of ways that's how you can connect with a huge amount of people, because you have a lot of hardcore players in MMOs, but in general, most players just play the game a little bit. They might play for a little while, but they might even play multiple MMOs at the same time. So going like super, super deep into the analysis, that's kind of not exactly what the majority of people are really looking for, right? You want to know, oh, this is how the systems work, right? This is what you can do. These are all the different game modes that you can participate in. That really is the bread and butter of the kind of MMO demographic for sure. In terms of pitfalls, I think you're absolutely right. The big pitfall with General is that you're not going to be seen as this like Omega. Yes, this guy knows exactly what he's talking about, and that might actually cause players to potentially dismiss your opinion within that community that you're speaking to, right? Which that can be a little unfair sometimes, I think, for sure. I think that I've seen people on Twitter get roasted for having kind of unpopular opinions about Guild Wars 2. And I'm like, that's a little unfair, right? Like, they're just giving their opinion, they haven't played the game 10,000 hours, right? But they know what's going on and they're able to formulate a valid opinion about an aspect of the game. I'd say the other pitfall is that MMOs are long games, very long games. And if you want to, how can I phrase this? If you want to kind of do stuff in the game, you're going to have to invest a lot of time, right? If you want to, say, talk about high-level PvP or hardcore raiding, right? It's going to be very difficult to do that in a general sense, right? I was speaking with Max, Liquid Maximum, the other day, and we were kind of talking about this issue. It's very difficult to be kind of high level in more than one MMO at the same time, because they're so complicated, because there's so much depth to these games. So if you are a more general content creator, you may struggle to kind of really get into the nitty gritty and talk about that kind of high level stuff, or perform a lot of these high level activities, because they have this innate high amount of time investment because of the depth and complexities of the game from the general perspective. And the specialist is, again, it's almost like the inverse of that, right? And I think a lot of it is, what do you want to do as a creator? Like, some people are going to really want to get into it and go deep on these topics, whereas others are going to be more interested in just talking about the overviews, the systems, and so on. But yeah, the specialist has more of an ability to kind of really get into it and talk about a wide range of things in the game and kind of do stuff, right? I can give like a good example of this. I guess with myself to an extent, because I play Guild Wars 2 a lot, maybe a little too much. I have the ability to kind of do whatever I want, right, at this point in the game, and it will be very difficult for a new content creator to kind of catch up with me in that sense, right? I've got a community in the game. I've got people who can help me run events. I've got people who I can do activities with. I can do all the PvE content, no problem. I can just we can just get people and we're going to go, right? We can go and play PvP. We can go and get into world versus world and so on. And being in the scene for a long time and being a specialist, it has this innate utility to it in terms of creating content, because it means that you can go and record anything, right? Like, in the very simplest terms, you can actually do the thing, right? Whereas if you're a generalist, you may not be able to do the thing, because you might essentially get gatekept by the game systems, so you can't do the thing. And then, of course, yeah, you're absolutely right. The pitfall is that you can potentially become tied to that game to an extent. People are going to see you as, oh yeah, like, this guy streams this, right? That's what that's what I'm interested in. That's what this person makes videos for. I do think that you can actually kind of get out of this to an extent, particularly in the way streaming and content creation is in the modern era. I think it's becoming less and less about the game and more about the individual. I think we see this with a lot of content creators. I think Asmongold would be a really good example, right? Big World of Warcraft player, right? But now I think it's very much Asmongold the streamer, not Asmongold the World of Warcraft player. And I think you can see other examples like this. So you can break out of that as a specialist, but yeah, it's definitely a potential limiting factor.
That's a brilliant answer. I'm not even going to edit that. I'm just going to put that answer in. I'm just going to be like, I don't care. All of this, everything, this whole thing. You know what's amazing is you're actually hitting all the talking points that I've written later in the script. We're about to get to questions and you're about to go, but I just brought that up. Yeah, logically, when I was writing these down, I thought, what logically flows from one to another? The next one, the point four, is the sheer amount of time it takes to play an MMORPG. Now, I've got a second channel where I review classic video games, PlayStation 1 and 64 stuff. And when I ask a random assortment of people how long you need to play an MMORPG for, not necessarily to understand it, but to review it, I get the number 100 hours coming up a lot. And I think it's because it's just a nice round number. It's the first triple digit number, and people say, yeah, 10, 20 hours, you'll understand it, but 100 hours is when you can review it. 100 hours is when you know you've experienced enough that your opinion is valid. So I went through and did some checks. On my retro channel, I've got a lot of games, but I took 10 of them. Castlevania Symphony of the Night, Devil May Cry 1, Silent Hill 1, Tomb Raider, Baldur's Gate, Armored Core, Medieval, Soul Reaver, Tenchu, and Rayman. Those 10 games took me collectively 96 hours to finish, which means you can, in theory, complete 10 of the greatest games ever made in less time than people want you to invest to hit the bare minimum to review an MMORPG. And this is probably why the mainstream gaming media don't cover it. The time investment compared to the potential audience, is the numbers just don't match up. So knowing that they are massive and you can never actually finish an MMORPG, given the nature of YouTube and Twitch and the constant content cycle and the content machine and the audience's need for more content, how much time realistically can a creator put into playing an MMORPG before they should be considered able to make content on it?
Oh, you know, I think that it's really hard to put an exact number on that. It can even vary between MMOs, I think. Like some have a shorter kind of early game segment, as it were. You kind of get right down to business pretty early on. And I think to an extent it can actually depend on the creator and what type of review that you want to create. For example, I don't think every MMO review needs to talk about raiding. Straight up. I don't think every MMO review needs to talk about PvP, right? I think you could bring that up, right? You can say, oh yeah, this is a game, and you can kind of give a brief overview. But I don't think you necessarily need to go into a deep dive about this because, for example, I think this is like a thing that gets really overlooked in MMO communities. People actually play MMOs for story and the that almost this single player experience, like this single player experience that's got other people in the world, right? You take a look at Final Fantasy. Right? If you actually look, it's really funny. Like just before we had this talk, I actually got an advert for 14. And what was the caption they had? It said something like an incredibly crafted story, an incredibly crafted narrative, right? You know, in this ad that I just saw for this MMO. And so I think it really does. It is varied. It depends on like what you're reviewing. What are you talking about? In this regard, like if you do want to play the Endgame, then yeah, sure, you're going to have to kind of get into it. You're going to have to try and really get a grip on how do the stats work, how do the skills work, how do the items work, right? The loot, the everything, reward structures. And yeah, then you're going to have to probably nuke some time and really go for it because things get really complicated and very much in depth there as well. But I think there are certainly different types of review that may not require as much of this extreme time investment to get a proper grip on, I'd say.
You know, your answer is very similar to Work to Game. They basically said it depends on the context of the review. If you want to review story, you need to finish the story. If you want to review raids, you need to finish the raids. And the MMORPG is such a varied game within itself that a review can't possibly cover it. You need to review a specific element of the game. On a slight side note, not related to this at all, about story, a friend of mine just started playing Guild Wars 2 to become a reviewer. She has been an MMORPG World of Warcraft content creator for ages, and I'm encouraging her to play more games because she's only played World of Warcraft. So when Guild Wars 2 went on sale with all the expansions, we bought her all the expansions and said, play. And she wanted to do the Trolls Revenge jumping puzzle, which I think is an amazing puzzle.
Yeah.
So I thought, right, there is no way I am letting you do this unless I have the Springer mount to get back to when we fall. So I Googled how you get the Springer mount, and I thought, right, it's in Path of Fire. I haven't played Path of Fire before, but I thought, you know what? I'm just going to speed run through it, get the Springer mount, and come back. And in the future, I'll take my time, and I'll play it slowly, and I'll read all the dialogue. Even during speed running, I wasn't paying any attention. And 3 hours in, I was still like, fuck you, Balthazar. You know, I was properly like Balthazar's Herald. She showed up. I'm like, it's fucking you again. I'm gonna kill you. I was into it. I was like, I wasn't even intending to get into the story, and halfway through, I was like, kind of into the story now. So yeah, I'm looking forward to playing Path of Fire, and I've not played Heart of Thorns yet. I'm so far behind, but again, that's because of the time investment required.
Yeah.
So
I mean, yeah, it's crazy.
yeah, the
You
sheer
know,
amount of time it takes to finish any MMO. That's why you can't be a specialist in all of them. If someone says, "Hey, put 100 hours into Guild Wars 2 before you can review it," and I
let's
do
get
that,
in there.
if I do that, and then I do it the same thing for the Elder Scrolls Online, and then Final Fantasy 14, and then RuneScape, and then World of Warcraft, and someone says to me, "Hey, what's Guild Wars 2 like?" I have to say, I don't know. I played it 400 hours ago. You know, the last review I made is outdated. But that's actually the next part of the question. So this is an interesting content creation one. This is part 5. The changing nature of MMOs and the attraction of ephemeral content for content creators. So what I mean by that is, because MMOs are constantly updating and changing with expansions and patches, the moment you put any kind of video out, you know it has a shelf life. You know it's going to become obsolete eventually. The only way you can create evergreen content for an MMO is if you make a review of a dead MMO, an MMO that's never going to change. The moment you put a video out, it's relevant until a system changes within your video. So as a content creator, you sat there thinking, I could put 100 hours into doing a really accurate review, but that review is only going to be relevant for a few weeks or a few months, if I'm lucky, maybe a year or two, which means as soon as it becomes irrelevant, people are going to stop searching for my review and start searching for the name of a patch note, or the name of an expansion, or the title of this. Which means the most attractive content to make as an MMORPG creator is the easy, quick stuff that gets lots of views and has very high search ratings on Google or YouTube. Videos such as, should you play this game in 2022? Fastest experience methods 2022 for this game. Best class, tier list for this. And the general audience look and go, MMO content is so vapid. It's the same videos recycled every year. And you're kind of thinking, yeah, that's because I know for a fact whatever I put out is going to have a shelf life, so I may as well put out what people are searching for. Do you believe that the time-sensitive nature of MMORPG lifespans and lifestyles and patch notes is pushing creators away from making evergreen content because you simply can't when the game changes so much, toward this vapid, ephemeral, repetitive content that the audience seem to want?
Yeah, it's a good point. I think that there's a lot of truth to that. It's a combination of what you just described, and I think some of the previous points we discussed, and the fact that it's really hard to do this, particularly if you're a newer creator. It's really hard to make MMO content because, you know, before you're in that position where you can start to talk about the more evergreen stuff, you need your 100 hours, right? You've got to have your 100 hours. So what are you making in your content creation in the first 100 hours? You're not really doing anything. So I think the combination of that definitely does nudge it in that direction, for sure. I mean, you could almost broaden this to almost a critique of content creation in general. I wouldn't say this is actually unique to MMOs as such. But yeah, it certainly becomes more extreme because of the fact it's not like, oh yeah, this video is going to be here forever. No, you're going to have to make it again, right? Good luck, right? And you know, every time, even if you want to make something like a guide, well, the guide might change, right? There's going to be something new. There's going to be a new gold farming method. There's going to be a new balance patch. There's going to be a new this, that, and whatever, right? So for sure, yeah. It is a little bit difficult to make stuff like this. I think that it can be done, but it's just very, very difficult. And the reward output is not necessarily higher than not putting effort in. But again, I would actually say that's more of a critique of social media and content creation as a whole. I think that a lot of stuff that is going to be more popular isn't necessarily going to be the highest effort, right? Because in general, you want to try and create, well, as much content as possible, right, on the hottest stuff right now. And if you try and make something that's like super well crafted, like super high effort, you're gonna kind of miss the boat, right? A lot of the time, like this actually reminds me. I I did a very in-depth New World review. There was a preview weekend, right? It was back in 2020, I think. And I was super hyped about the game. I'd put 600 hours into the private alpha. At this point, I was really enjoying it. I was playing it with a few friends of mine. I was like, wow, this game is sick. It's got a few issues, but, I was really enjoying it. And after that, like, I spent, I think, a month compiling all the footage, getting my script exactly right on what I wanted to say. I made this colossal 1.5 hour video. So actually one of my favorite videos I ever made. And it didn't get any views, right? Because it was way too late, right? It was way too slow. But I'm still happy with it. I like the video, but yeah, there is this like super race against time. You got to be the newest. You got to be the fastest. You got to be the most exciting, right? And in MMOs, it's very hard to be the fastest, be the best, and also be the highest quality content. Because again, it's got such a great deal of depth in the genre that it's really hard to be super well produced and really fast. In a game that has a little bit less scope, it's a lot easier to be fast and have really high production value simultaneously. And that's where the beauty of MMOs, the depth, the complexity, kind of backfires on content creators a little bit, I feel.
That's a brilliant answer. I hate you. I'm looking at I'm looking at the timestamps and I'm thinking, I can't put all this in the video, but I want to. This is the problem. Now, I'm just going to make your bits a bit longer. This is fine. Let's go on to the next bit. I've got 2 more questions. Number 6. MMORPGs are interesting in media in general, insofar as your first experience with the opening of the game is often nothing like the end game. And not many other bits of media change as much as MMOs do. And it would be weird if they did. It'd be weird if you were reading like a rom-com romance novel and you got to the last chapter and it suddenly becomes a choose-your-own-adventure with pictures. And you talk to someone and they're like, oh, you got to the good bit. You got to the end book. Or, you're watching a TV show and the final season has a different cast and it's filmed in a different way and it's edited and you're like, oh yeah, you've got through the slog bit. Now the good bit begins. It's so weird that the end game experience is often nothing like the opening experience in many, many games. And this presents a challenge for reviewers, because if you're reviewing a game blind for the first time, the experience that you have within the first 10 to 20 hours might not be representative of the end game experience that you're going to have for hundreds of hours if you ever do get to the end game. This puts you between a rock and a hard place. The community will say to you, oh, ignore that bit. Ignore the leveling. It doesn't matter. Don't worry about the opening bit. This is irrelevant. And if you make a review where you ignore the opening bit, you're going to appease the fan base, but you're not giving a realistic view to a brand new player, because they will have to go through the leveling at some point. And if you make a review, or a first impression, if you will, of the first 20 or 30 hours of the game, and you talk about the opening experience, the leveling, the difficulty, the problems, you are being genuine to the new players, but you're not representing what the game actually is accurately enough. And I think this is a pacing issue within MMO design itself. But of course, as a content creator, as a reviewer, how do you feel playing the opening of an MMO, knowing as an experienced MMO player, it's irrelevant, but also knowing you've got to include some of it in a review, otherwise you're being disingenuous to a new player? What challenges do you face as a reviewer between first impressions and end game, given time constraints and review honesty?
I think it is actually, I think it is relevant. I think you can actually find some really important critiques as a very new player. And it's funny. There's no better game to demonstrate this than Guild Wars 2. Guild Wars 2 is kind of complicated for newer players, actually. This is one of the biggest complaints that is received by new players. It's like, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what the hell is going on. What am I supposed to do? Right? And I think you can similarly see that in other games. You know, like I think Final Fantasy is criticized for having a very slow starting out leveling experience, for example. World of Warcraft can be critiqued for having slightly confusing progression systems, particularly as you get towards the end game. I think these are actually really important. I think the reviewer does need to keep this in mind, that things might change, but I think it is actually important to say, yeah, the new player experience could use a little bit of work, right? That ain't so hot. And I'd actually say that if people get mad at that, well, hey, that's on you, right? That's not on me, right? Again, it's in the interest of an MMO's community and fan base that these issues would be addressed, because then you're going to get more players, right? Then your community's bigger. Then your game company gets more money and you get more content. Boom. There it is. You'd love to see it. So yeah, I do think that the reviewer needs to be aware of that though, and go, okay, right, I have a semi-duty to an extent to at least kind of push through it and see if things change, and then report on that as well. But I do think that the experiences when you're just getting into it, you're just playing through different stages of the game, are very worthy of critique indeed, actually. Because, as a new player, you're going to experience that and you might fall off there as well. And I guess, if you say, hey, it does get better, well, maybe it will kind of drag a few people through, I guess. But that's it's hiding the problem to an extent.
I think it's very strange that the MMORPG genre is quite self-indulgent in the fact that it says, hey, you have to slog through an inferior version of our product before we reward you with the superior version. If you get through the lackluster content that we've made, you are lucky enough to see the good content that you've now got access to. And there's a level of pride that comes with reaching that. You almost feel, hey, I enjoyed.
I survived.
I got through the gauntlet of crap and now I've got to the good bit. But any media would be absolutely crucified for doing that. It would be absolutely chastised of, why are you making season 1, 2, and 3 of your show crap? Because season 4 is amazing. Why don't you start at season 4 if that's the case? If the first 5 books in your 10-book series are dull and then it gets good at 6, people are just going to start at 6. MMOs seem uniquely placed to almost expect the player base to endure lesser before they give them more.
It's understandable why. I think this is a bit of a super hard problem to attack from a developer perspective. If you go back and you fix old areas of the game, great. Now you've got no new content for your current player base, right? Or you've reduced the amount of content for the newer player base, right? And if you only make new content, well, okay, unlucky. Now, when new players come in, they're going to have a super weird, wonky experience compared to something else. I think a lot of MMOs do try to get around this. You might have a level boost. You might, when you buy an expansion, you might spawn in where that expansion is, right? So instead of kind of going all the way through, you're going to start at the latest piece of content so you can get in there and play with your friends. It's a super hard issue, in my opinion, to deal with, just because of the nature of MMOs. Again, I'll just talk about Guild Wars 2. This is a really interesting example here. What do you do? Do you, because again, it's actually more relevant because it's a very story-driven game. What do you do as ArenaNet? Do we say, okay, we're going to start everyone in End of Dragons, the latest content, so they can get into it, they can play with all of their friends who maybe recommended them the game, like straight into it, boom, let's go. But hang on, if we do that, they don't have the story context. They won't be familiar with the characters, right? And some of the developments that have happened that have led up to this expansion. So now we're kind of getting a weird experience there. But then if we send them all the way to the start of the game, they're also having a super weird experience because it's one, they're going to have to play through all of that to kind of get to where they bought End of Dragons, right? And they've got to play through the core game, Heart of Thorns, and Path of Fire to get to End of Dragons. It's weird. MMOs are weird. I'm not sure if this is it's a super hard problem to solve, and there are going to be trade-offs either way. Are you going to, I think there was a really interesting approach with WoW recently, right? I think they completely redid their experience, and you play as like a special new player experience thingy, and it kind of tells you, oh, what expansion would you like to level in, basically. You can kind of pick which one you want to do, and then you kind of get to the most recent one. That's a pretty interesting idea, but even that isn't perfect. I think this is kind of an unsolvable problem just because of the nature of MMORPGs. Just in general, they are colossal.
I think it's a main problem when you try and tell a linear story within,
Yeah.
because I mean, RuneScape, for example, manages to get around it by having multiple linear stories that all culminate and then end. And I think this is an issue with stories ending. Stories need to end at some point. And the MMO is an interesting world. It's a fascinating world. But when you have like a main story in a world, it almost makes the world feel fictional because very few worlds or countries or even cities have main stories. Everyone's got their own thing going on. Everyone's got stuff happening. So whenever you try and tell a single main story in an MMO, it ends up feeling very linear as opposed to a kind of open-ended world where you can go and do whatever you want with multiple things all happening. I'd like to move on to the last question, number 7. Now, this is an interesting one. Whenever I'm playing an MMO to enjoy it, I'm listening to music, I've got Netflix on in the background, I'm chatting to my friends, I'm not hyper focusing on the game, I'm just enjoying the surface level experience that I'm having, possibly with a little bit of critique. When I'm playing to critique, I've got a notebook next to me, and I take extensive notes in this book. I write down everything. I'll play for 5 minutes, make a note. Play for 5 minutes, make a note. If you were to watch me play a game as I'm analyzing it or critiquing it for content, I look like an idiot because I'm running at the wall, I'm jumping into a tree, I'm equipping every item, I'm resizing the window repeatedly to see if it crashes. As an example, when I was making the video on Rift, I spoke to every single NPC in the starting area, every single shop, and read every item name. And I found an item called Mudder's Milk, which is a reference to Firefly, the TV show. But I only found it because I spoke to every NPC. A new player isn't going to speak to every NPC because you don't need to, and the game doesn't tell you to. And an established player isn't going to do it because they know how to get experience and health items and mana items from better shops later in the game. I play in a very inefficient way when critiquing because I need to experience all of these things to critique them. People often watch my videos and go, there's no way he played for 10 hours and only got there. I could get there in 3 hours. And I'm thinking, yeah, you probably could if you played efficiently, if you just speed ran through the game as fast as you can. It's the difference in speed reading a book compared to reading a book to analyze and critique for the themes and the narratives and to write a thing. How do you find you experience games differently playing for fun in your own time compared to playing to critique or analyze those games?
It definitely is a very different experience. Obviously, like a lot of my content, basically all of it is about Guild Wars 2, but I actually do, whenever there's a new quest in RuneScape, I might log on and play it. I'm playing World of Warcraft Classic right now. Really like that game. Because again, I think it was a great point in the last point I'm actually about, where you were talking about kind of non-linear stories and world building. I think there is something to be really said for games like that, actually. But for sure, yeah, it definitely is a different mindset. I would say though that I think with reviews, what you'll find is that it's actually a combination of both of these things. It's not like, oh, the only stuff that goes into the review is my hardcore analysis. I think the analysis is important. As a reviewer, you want to say, okay, how does this actually work? What is this system? There's a cool reference there. I love the attention to detail here. So you are going to be analytical because those are the things that you can characterize a game. You can see the care and the love that the developers put into crafting this video game. So I think that analysis is super important. But I think in a review, you're also going to be talking about, yeah, I was playing the game and this happened and it was cool, right? I was doing this with my friends and it was really fun and we really loved that. That was an amazing, memorable experience. So I think that there is a different mode when you go into analysis critique mode, but there's always going to be, in my opinion, that underlying component of I played the game and it was fun, or it wasn't.
That's perfect, man. That's absolutely perfect. Yeah, that's pretty much all 7 areas. Have I told you who else I've managed to get to chat on in extremely late notice? So we've got MMO Byte, who does all the anime stuff, Lazy Peon, who does general stuff, Kira TV has taken time away from his stuff, Callum Upton, Work to Game, both the Ginger Prime and Chris from that. Those guys have spanned time chat. Zeppler, who does Final Fantasy 14 stuff. Brozime, who does Warframe stuff, Wicked Wiz, who has found a lot of success recently with his What Went Wrong series on YouTube, and a guy called Many Kudos, who does a lot of controversy stuff on YouTube, controversial card games and board games and video games and stuff. So this video is going to contain a lot of very specialized knowledge, contrasted with a lot of general overview MMO critique. It's probably going to end up being like an hour and a half long by now, but I'm happy with that. Thank you so much for your time, dude. I think this is going to give the audience a true glimpse behind the curtain that when people say every MMO content creator sucks, we're going to be able to say, look, we're doing our best. We don't have the funding of the big boys. We aren't getting tens of millions of views per video. We don't have a full team of editors and writers and lighting experts behind us. It's normally just a guy in a room. And yeah, it might not have the same quality as Marvel, but people are making content for you because they love the genre. No one's getting into MMOs because they want to get rich. No one's thinking, hey, I know what's a lucrative YouTube area. MMO critique. It's not. It's a terrible place to be. But people are doing it for the love of it. I'm going to let you go. I'll let you know as soon as the video is sorted and done. Drop me a message if I can do anything for you, or I know you got a podcast. I was on your podcast many years ago.
Yes,
I was on your podcast when I was but a small, humble YouTuber.
Yes.
And I want to get back onto that, man. If you can find time,
yeah,
love
absolutely. I'd love to. Yeah, I was thinking of kind of doing something. It's funny. It's one of the topics we talked about today, actually. Kind of like the MMO bubble. Actually, this idea is something I really want to kind of attack. I think MMO communities have a tendency to not understand what the game looks like from other perspectives. I think that'll be a super interesting thing. I was gonna maybe try and talk to some more generalist creators like yourself and Peon. Perhaps I've spoken to him before, actually, and kind of really dig into that because it's fascinating. But yeah, anytime, I'd love to chat anytime. Always welcome to hit me up. If you need anything in Guild Wars 2, I'm the guy. I'm the Guild Wars 2 guy.
I'm going to need you to help me when I'm pushing through Path of Fire, or when I'm pushing through Heart of Thorns, or when because I want to look into raids. One of the things I want to do on YouTube is once I've kind of exhausted the worst MMO ever content, I want to do, the first 10 hours versus the last 10 hours. And I'll put 100 hours into a game, and I'll be like, this is the first 10, this is the middle 80, this is the final 10. And when I'm doing raids and dungeons and fractals, I'm pretty much going to need you to just call on a team and have you guys not necessarily carry me, but I know I'll suck until I get good at it. Right, I've got to head off. Thank you so much for the time, dude. I will end this recording here and get back to you. I won't be able to use everything, but I'll make you look super smart.
Hell that's what I'm going to try. That's what I like to see. Yeah, that's good.
Right. See you later, man.
Hey,
you have a good day.
Take it easy. Thank you so much. See ya.